She walked onto the plane in full military uniform, ribbons, medals, stars on her shoulders. 25 years of service stitched into every fold. But before she could even sit down, a white male flight attendant stopped her. He didn't check her ticket. He didn't care about the stars on her chest. He just saw a black woman in first class and decided she didn't belong. He told her to walk to the back because someone like her couldn't possibly have earned that seat. What happened next should have shattered her. Instead, it shattered him because she was who she said she was. A high-ranking officer, a decorated war veteran. And when the captain stepped out and saluted her in front of the entire cabin, the silence was louder than anything the attendant had said. But instead of lashing out, she did something far more powerful. She asked for accountability, not revenge. And what she demanded after could change the future of every soldier who dares to take their rightful seat. The early morning stillness of Reagan National Airport wrapped around General Regina Matthews like a familiar blanket. In the empty restroom, she adjusted the perfectly pressed jacket of her Army service uniform, each medal and ribbon telling its own story of service and sacrifice. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows. But she stood tall, shoulders squared as she had done for the past 25 years. From her pocket she pulled out a worn prayer card, its edges soft from years of handling. The verse, faded but still legible, read, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Her mother had given her this card on her first day at West Point, and it had stayed with her through every challenge since. Today's mission wasn't combat or strategy. It was speaking at the Memorial Day service for fallen soldiers at Arlington. Her heart ached thinking of Private James Torres, whose mother would be in the front row. She had promised to honor his memory, to tell his story of courage. Tucking the card away, she gathered her small carry-on and headed toward Gate C4. The clicking of her polished shoes echoed through the terminal. She felt the familiar weight of eyes following her, some curious, some questioning, some dismissive. After all these years, she'd learned to let it roll off her back like morning dew. The boarding pass in her hand clearly showed Seat 2A, first class. It wasn't her usual choice, but the military travel office had booked it due to her speaking engagement. She waited patiently as priority boarding was called, standing with quiet dignity among the business travelers in their suits and casual tourists in their comfort wear. On the jet bridge, she paused for a moment, closing her eyes. "Lord, give me strength to serve with honor today," she whispered, a ritual as much a part of her uniform as the stars on her shoulders. The first-class cabin welcomed her with soft lighting and the smell of fresh coffee. She found 2A easily, stored her carry-on in the overhead bin with military precision, and took her seat. The leather was cool and comfortable against her uniform. "Excuse me, ma'am?" General Matthews looked up to see a flight attendant, male, maybe mid-40s, with graying temples and a name tag that read, Kevin, standing over her. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you might be confused about your seating assignment," he said, his voice carrying a forced patience, as if speaking to a child. "The economy cabin is further back." General Matthews reached for her boarding pass. "No confusion, sir. Seat 2A. She held it out for his inspection, her voice calm and professional. Kevin barely glanced at the ticket, his lips tightening. "There must be some mistake. This section is first class." He emphasized the words as if they held special meaning. "I'm aware of that," she replied evenly. "As you can see from my boarding pass, this is my assigned seat." His eyes flicked over her uniform, lingering on the stars at her shoulders, the rows of ribbons and medals. His expression shifted from dismissive to suspicious. "That's quite an elaborate costume," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "But playing dress-up doesn't entitle anyone to sit wherever they want." A few nearby passengers turned to stare. General Matthews felt the old familiar heat of humiliation trying to rise, but she'd learned long ago to keep her voice steady, her demeanor professional. "Sir, I assure you this is not a costume. I'm happy to show you my military ID, and I ask that you please check the passenger manifest." Instead of reaching for the manifest, Kevin straightened his tie and raised his voice. "I need a supervisor to first class immediately." His words cut through the cabin's quiet murmur, drawing every eye their way. "We have a situation with an unauthorized passenger." General Matthews sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of composure even as the whispers started around her. She thought of Private Torres, of his mother waiting to hear her speak, of the worn prayer card in her pocket. 25 years of service, and still, some people couldn't see past their own prejudices to the stars on her shoulders. The other passengers were now openly staring, some with sympathy, others with uncertainty. A businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. An elderly woman a few rows back covered her mouth with her hand. Kevin stood there, arms crossed, wearing what he clearly thought was authority, but showed only bias. "Someone will be here shortly to escort you to your proper seat," he said loudly, making no attempt to be discreet. The humiliation was public now, deliberate, but General Matthews had faced worse in her career. She sat straight, chin lifted slightly, the very picture of dignity under fire. She didn't need to defend her right to be there. The truth would speak for itself. She just had to wait it out, like so many storms before. Her hand brushed against her pocket, feeling the outline of her mother's prayer card. Behind her composed exterior, she sent up another quiet prayer. Not for herself, but for the flight attendant who saw a uniform and chose to see a costume, who looked at a general and saw only what his prejudices allowed him to see. The flight attendant planted his feet wider in the aisle, crossing his arms. His name tag read, Timothy. His voice carried through the first-class cabin, sharp with authority he hadn't earned. "Ma'am, you need to move back to economy and stop making a scene." General Regina Matthews kept her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "Sir, I understand you're doing your job. Would you please read my boarding pass aloud?" "Anyone can print fake documents." Timothy's eyes swept over her uniform again, lingering on her insignia with obvious doubt. "And costumes?" A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. The click and whir of phone cameras filled the silence. General Matthews reached for her military ID with deliberate slowness, holding it out. This might help clear things up. Timothy didn't even glance at it. "Ma'am, if you don't move to your proper section, I'll have to—" "Is there a problem here?" A senior flight attendant hurried up the aisle, her face pinched with concern. Before she could speak again, the captain emerged from the cockpit. He was tall, with silver at his temples and crow's feet around his eyes that deepened as he looked at General Matthews. His spine straightened instantly. "General Matthews, ma'am." His salute was crisp, automatic. "I apologize for this situation. Are you all right?" The cabin fell absolutely silent. Timothy's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "At ease, Captain," General Matthews said quietly. "And yes, I'm fine." The captain's jaw tightened as he turned to Timothy. "This is Brigadier General Regina Matthews. She commands the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson." Timothy swayed slightly. I didn't—" "General," the captain continued, "would you like to discuss this privately? We can delay departure if needed. Your safety and comfort are our primary concern." General Matthews looked at Timothy, seeing past his uniform to something deeper, the trembling hands, the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the fear in his eyes. She thought of the memorial service waiting for her, of fallen soldiers who had given everything, of what real courage meant. "I'll keep my assigned seat," she said, "but I would like to speak with someone about accountability measures, not for revenge, but for change." The captain nodded sharply. "Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure it's handled appropriately." As Timothy was led away by the senior flight attendant, passengers began whispering. General Matthews closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. The plane began its taxi to the runway, the familiar rumble of engines a counterpoint to the soft chimes of phones throughout the cabin. A young woman across the aisle quickly turned her screen away, but not before General Matthews caught a glimpse of a social media feed. Her own face looked back at her, captured in the moment Timothy had first confronted her. The video was already collecting views, comments, shares. The lead flight attendant, Sandra, according to her name tag, leaned close as she checked seatbelts. "General," she whispered, "corporate will want a statement. This is already spreading." General Matthews nodded once, her eyes on the window as the runway lights blurred past. She touched the worn Bible verse in her pocket, feeling the edges that had softened over years of worry and prayer. This wouldn't end when they landed, but maybe, just maybe, it could lead to something better than another viral moment of public shame. The plane lifted into the dawn sky, carrying with it a story that was already racing ahead of them through the digital clouds, out of anyone's control. The plane leveled off into steady flight, but the tension in first class remained thick enough to touch. General Marion Robinson kept her eyes fixed on the clouds outside her window, carefully controlling each breath. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, wanted to shake. She wouldn't let them. The familiar weight of her uniform, every medal earned, every button polished, felt heavier now, not from shame, but from the weight of all it represented, all those who had worn it before her, all those who would wear it after. "General Robinson?" The captain's voice was soft but firm. He stood beside her seat, his posture straight with respect. "May I speak with you for a moment?" She turned from the window, meeting his eyes with quiet dignity. "Of course, Captain. I want to personally apologize for what happened during boarding." His words were clear, direct, no excuses, no hedging. "I've already started the formal incident report. What else do you need from us?" General Robinson considered this carefully. "Treat me like you'd treat any officer, Captain. That's all I've ever asked for. Verify facts before you judge." He nodded, understanding the deeper message in her words. Behind him, the flight attendant who had caused the scene approached. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. "General, I need to apologize. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to—" She raised her hand, stopping his stumbling words. "Please listen carefully," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You will not speak over me again. Right now, you're going to listen." He swallowed hard and nodded. "When you saw me in this seat, you made assumptions. When I showed you my ticket, you dismissed it. When I showed you my ID, you implied it was fake." She paused, letting each point land. "This uniform isn't a costume. It represents years of service, sacrifice, and dedication. Not just mine, but every service member's." The flight attendant's face flushed with shame. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Your actions didn't just embarrass me," she continued. "They dishonored what this uniform stands for. That hurts more than any personal slight." A movement caught her attention. An older woman with silver hair had approached quietly, carrying a cup of water. She offered it to the general with gentle hands. "Thank you for serving," the woman said softly. Something in her voice, and perhaps the slight catch of emotion, told General Robinson this wasn't just politeness. This was a military, widow or wife, someone who understood the weight of service. "Thank you," General Robinson replied, accepting both the water and the moment of grace it represented. The intercom crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The weather ahead looks clear." But General Robinson's heart was still pounding against her ribcage, each beat a reminder of old wounds reopened. She watched as understanding finally dawned in the flight attendant's eyes. Not just that he'd made a mistake, but that his mistake came from somewhere deeper, from beliefs he'd never questioned until this moment forced him to see them. He took a step back, looking shaken. His earlier confidence had crumbled completely, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that his actions revealed more about himself than he'd been ready to face. He started, then stopped at a loss for words. "Take some time," General Robinson said quietly. "Think about why your first instinct was to doubt me. That's where the real work begins." She turned back to the window, not in dismissal, but in boundary setting. The flight attendant walked away, his steps unsteady, leaving her to the quiet companionship of clouds and the weight of a truth that needed to be spoken. The older woman who'd brought the water remained nearby, a silent ally in the aftermath of confrontation. She didn't speak again, but her presence offered its own kind of comfort, the understanding that comes from those who have lived close to service and sacrifice. General Robinson touched the small verse card in her pocket, drawing strength from its worn edges. The words didn't make the hurt disappear, but they reminded her why speaking truth with dignity mattered. It wasn't just about her seat on this plane. It was about every person in uniform who would come after her, every barrier that needed to fall, every mind that needed to change. Her fingers traced the edge of her captain's bars, feeling each ridge and valley of the metal. The same bars that the flight attendant had dismissed as costume pieces now caught the sunlight streaming through the window, gleaming with quiet authority. They weren't just decorations. They were proof of a journey that had earned her not just this seat, but the right to demand better from those who would deny it to others. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and General Thompson felt the familiar settling of wheels against tarmac. As passengers began their usual rush to grab bags and phones, she stayed seated, allowing herself one more moment of composure. The flight attendant had kept his distance since their conversation, moving through the cabin like a ghost. When she finally stepped into the terminal, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, not toward her uniform as usual, but toward screens held in hands. Some people whispered and pointed, trying to be subtle and failing. A young man in a business suit actually stopped walking to stare at his phone, then at her, then back at his phone. Her own device buzzed repeatedly in her pocket. When she checked it, the screen, filled with notifications, missed calls, text messages, social media alerts. The video had spread like wildfire. Comments and captions argued back and forth. This is how they treat our military? Maybe if she hadn't been so aggressive. About time someone exposed this. Why's everyone making it about race? General Thompson tucked the phone away, her steps measured and deliberate as she headed toward baggage claim. The familiar weight of her uniform felt different now, less like armor, more like a spotlight. General Thompson? A woman in a crisp airline blazer intercepted her path. I'm Sarah Martinez from Customer Relations. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest regrets about today's unfortunate misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding landed like a false note in a familiar song. General Thompson kept her face neutral. We'd like to offer you unlimited, first-class upgrades for the next year, Martinez continued, as well as lifetime lounge access and 10,000 bonus miles. She held out a folder full of vouchers and certificates. General Thompson didn't reach for it. Ms. Martinez, I appreciate the gesture, but that's not what this is about. I understand, and we truly want to make this right. Then let's talk about making it right, General Thompson said quietly. Not for me. For everyone. Who comes after me? What's your plan for crew training? Your process for accountability? Your system for protecting passengers who don't have viral videos to defend them? Martinez's rehearsed smile faltered. I'll have to check with our leadership team about those specifics. Please do. I'll expect an email with concrete steps, not comfort prizes. The general collected her bag and headed for the hotel shuttle, aware of more phones, recording her exit. Her shoulders stayed straight until she reached her room, where she finally allowed herself to close the door and breathe. The uniform jacket came off first. She hung it carefully, smoothing invisible wrinkles, then sank into the room's armchair. Only now did her hands shake slightly as she pulled out her phone again. She scrolled past dozens of messages until she found the number she needed. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Jennifer, I saw the video. Are you okay? Chaplain Mike. Her voice softened with relief. I'm okay. Just tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than missing sleep. Want to talk about it? I handled it right, she said. Kept calm. Professional. Didn't let anger take over. But it still hurts. The admission came out barely above a whisper. All these stars on my shoulders. All these years of service. And some people still see, she trailed off. See what they choose to see, Chaplain Mike finished. The old wounds don't heal just because you outrank them. No, they don't. She glanced at her jacket hanging in the closet. The airline's trying to smooth it over with upgrades and apologies. And you said no. I said no. A small smile touched her lips. Grace doesn't mean letting wrong things slide. Amen to that, the chaplain agreed. Grace guides justice. It doesn't erase it. Remember what you told me when you made general? About using your position to open doors? To open doors and keep them open, she quoted herself. Then maybe that's what tomorrow's speech needs to be about. Not just honoring those we've lost, but building the world they died serving for. After they said goodbye, General Thompson opened her notebook to prepare for tomorrow's memorial address. At the top of the blank page, she wrote a single line. Dignity is not a seat, it's a standard. She stared at the words for a long moment, letting their truth settle in her heart. Then she began to write. The morning sun painted soft shadows across the Memorial Center's polished floors as General Martinez walked through the quiet lobby. Her uniform was crisp, her shoulders squared, though her heart felt heavy with more than just today's solemn purpose. Amos Eleanor Thompson, the Gold Star mother organizing the event, rushed forward to meet her. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and a gold star pin glinted on her lapel. General, thank you for coming. She clasped the general's hands warmly, then hesitated. We've all seen the video. It's spreading through our whole veterans community. General Martinez squeezed the woman's hands gently. Today isn't about that, Mrs. Thompson. Today is about honoring your son and all those who gave everything for our country. That's what matters. Relief softened Mrs. Thompson's worried features. Bless you for saying that. Come, let me show you where you'll speak. As they walked through the Memorial Center's main hall, the general spotted a familiar face. The young service member from her flight stood near a display case, fidgeting with their uniform cuffs. Their eyes darted away when they saw her looking. "Excuse me a moment," the general said to Mrs. Thompson. She walked over to the nervous young soldier. "At ease," she said softly. The soldier's shoulders relaxed slightly, but their face still showed traces of shame. "Ma'am, I should have said something. On the plane. I was right there and I just sat quiet and—" "Stop right there." The general's voice was firm but kind. "You're not responsible for other people's actions. What matters is that you're here now showing respect for the fallen. That takes real courage. But after what happened to you, listen to me carefully. You've earned your uniform. You've earned your place. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Not even yourself, understand?" The young soldier straightened, blinking back tears. "Yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am." Her phone buzzed as she walked back to Mrs. Thompson. The airline's number flashed on the screen. With a small sigh, she answered. "General Martinez, this is Thomas Chen, VP of Customer Relations. We'd very much like to meet with you before the memorial service today to address yesterday's unfortunate incident." She could hear the careful PR speak in his tone. "Mr. Chen, I'm happy to meet, but only if we're discussing real changes, training programs, policy reforms, concrete steps to prevent this from happening to others. I'm not interested in damage control." A pause. "Of course, General, we take this very seriously. We'll have some proposals ready for your review." Across town, flight attendant James Parker stared at his phone, reading the email for the 5th time. "Immediate administrative leave pending investigation." His hands shook as he set the phone down on his kitchen counter. 23 years, he muttered. 23 years of service, and now, what? They're throwing me under the bus because some general got offended. The shame of yesterday was hardening into something else, something angry and defensive. He'd made a mistake, sure, but did he deserve to lose everything? His sister's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. His mortgage wouldn't wait for an investigation. "She's destroying my life," he said to his empty kitchen, "all because I asked for her boarding pass, because I did my job." Deep down, a small voice whispered that wasn't true, but it was easier to be angry than afraid. Back at her hotel that evening, General Martinez sat at the desk, her dress shoes waiting to be polished. The leather gleamed dully in the lamplight. She picked up the polishing cloth, her movements measured and precise, the same way she'd done this task thousands of times before. The familiar rhythm of buffing the leather usually calmed her, but tonight her thoughts kept drifting. To the flight, to tomorrow's meeting with the airline, to the young soldier's face and Mrs. Thompson's worried eyes, and the flight attendant's defensive apology. She set down the cloth and closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "help me speak truth tomorrow, but don't let old hurts make me harsh. Help me find the right words, words that might actually change something." The shoes sat, half-polished on the desk, waiting for her to find her way forward, between justice and grace, between accountability and mercy. Tomorrow would require both. She picked up the cloth again. One shoe at a time, one step at a time, just like always. The apartment door slammed behind Marcus as he stumbled inside, his crisp flight attendant uniform now feeling like it was choking him. His hands shook as he dropped his keys onto the kitchen counter. With a clatter, the phone in his pocket buzzed again. It hadn't stopped since the video went viral 3 hours ago. "Marcus, that you?" his sister Sarah called from the living room. "Have you seen what's happening online?" He yanked at his tie, trying to breathe. "Not now, Sarah," but she was already walking toward him, phone extended. "People are saying it was just a seat issue, okay?" His voice cracked on the last word, betraying him. "Just a misunderstanding about first class." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "A seat issue? That's not what this looks like." She held up her phone, where the video played on silent. His own face, twisted with dismissive authority, pointing toward economy, while a decorated officer sat calmly in her assigned seat. Marcus turned away, But the scene kept replaying in his head. The perfect creases in her uniform, the boarding pass she'd tried to show him. The way he hadn't even bothered to look at it properly, had just assumed. "I didn't know she was really a general," he muttered. Would it have mattered? Sarah's voice was quiet. "If she was just another black woman in regular clothes with a first-class ticket, would you have checked the manifest then?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through the notifications. Hundreds of angry comments, tweets, calling for his firing, memes of his face plastered with cruel captions. "My whole career," he whispered. 15 years of perfect service reviews. Perfect service for who? The new voice made them both jump. Their Uncle Joe, a Vietnam veteran, stood in the doorway. He'd been napping on the couch, but now stood ramrod straight, his old military bearings showing through. Marcus sank into a kitchen chair, his defenses crumbling. "Uncle Joe, I didn't mean to—" "Show me your phone," Joe interrupted. With trembling fingers, Marcus pulled up the viral clip and pressed play. The sound filled the kitchen. His own voice, dripping with condescension, telling a general officer she must be confused about her seat assignment. Joe's face hardened. "Play it again. Please, I can't—" Again. Marcus hit play. This time, he heard what his uncle wanted him to hear. The contempt in his tone, the automatic assumption of authority over someone who outranked him in every possible way. "If you'd respected the uniform," Joe said slowly, "you'd have checked her ticket first, but you saw her skin and decided she couldn't belong there." "That's not fair," Marcus protested weakly. "We get people trying to sneak into first class all the time." "Don't." Joe's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare make excuses. I watched men and women of every color die for that uniform, and you treated it like a Halloween costume." Marcus opened his notes app, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had to write something, some kind of statement. The airline's PR team had already reached out, suggesting he lay low while they handled it. He typed, "While I regret any misunderstanding, airline policy requires us to verify all seat assignments. Delete. I apologize if anyone was offended by my attempt to maintain proper cabin organization. Delete. As a dedicated flight attendant with 15 years of experience, delete." His sister touched his shoulder gently. "Marcus, stop trying to justify it." He looked up at her, then at his uncle, who still stood like a sentinel of truth. The shame he'd been fighting all day finally broke through. His hands fell to his lap. "I was wrong," he whispered. "Say it again," Joe commanded. Marcus straightened in his chair and opened a new note. His fingers moved slowly but surely across the screen as he typed, "I was wrong, and I need to own it." The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of the airline's corporate office as General Regina Wilson walked purposefully down the quiet hallway. Her polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step measured and deliberate. The brass buttons of her uniform caught the light, a reminder of everything the fabric represented. Inside the conference room, two figures rose to greet her. Mark Stevens, the airline's regional executive, adjusted his tie nervously. Beside him, Sarah Chen from Public Relations maintained a practiced smile. "General Wilson, thank you for coming," Stevens said, gesturing to a chair. "We want to address this unfortunate misunderstanding during the boarding process." "Stop right there." The general's voice was quiet but firm. She placed a single folder on the table. What happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, witnessed by a plane full of passengers and now millions online. Let's begin with that truth. Sarah Chen leaned forward, her smile never wavering. "We completely understand your concerns. We've drafted a joint statement that acknowledges some confusion during the boarding process." "Ms. Chen," the general interrupted, opening her folder. "I've served 30 years, commanded troops in 3 combat zones, and buried too many good soldiers. I don't play word games. What happened was discrimination, plain and simple." Stevens shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "General, we want to make this right." "Good." She pulled out 3 typed pages. "Here are my non-negotiables. First, an official apology that names exactly what happened, bias-based, discrimination against a uniformed service member. Second, mandatory training for all crew on bias recognition and proper verification procedures. Third, a clear, written policy that crew must follow before challenging any passenger's seating assignment." Sarah's smile finally cracked. "General, perhaps we could discuss a more private resolution?" The airline is prepared to offer substantial compensation with a standard confidentiality agreement, of course. The general sat perfectly still, her eyes steady. You're offering me hush money. A generous settlement, Stevens cut in quickly. To resolve this quietly and... No, the word fell like a gavel. I won't sign away someone else's future dignity. This isn't about money. It's about making sure no one else faces what I faced. The room fell silent. Outside, a plane roared overhead, a distant reminder of why they were here. The next person might not be a general, she continued. They might be a young lieutenant fresh from training, or a sergeant coming home from deployment. They deserve better than what happened to me. Stephen studied the papers before him, his forehead creased. These changes would require significant resources and time. Yes, they would. The general stood, straightening her jacket. And they're non-negotiable. I have a memorial service to prepare for this afternoon. We can pause any public statements until after that's done. Those families deserve their day of remembrance without distraction. But I expect to meet with your full leadership and policy teams within the week. Sarah started to protest, but Stevens raised a hand to stop her. We'll arrange the meeting, General. Back in her hotel room, the general sat at the small desk, her memorial speech notes spread before her. The morning's confrontation had left her tired but focused. She picked up her pen, carefully reviewing each line she'd written for the fallen soldiers' families. The words needed to comfort without hiding truth, to honor sacrifice without glorifying loss. She thought of the young faces she'd commanded, the letters she'd written to parents and spouses. Some truths had to be spoken, even when they hurt. She adjusted a paragraph, then another, making each word count. Through her window, she could see flags at half-staff in the distance rippling in the morning breeze. Tomorrow's headlines wouldn't matter. Today was about honor, about service, about things bigger than airline seats and viral videos. The general checked her watch. 3 hours until the memorial. She straightened her ribbon rack, brushed an invisible speck from her sleeve, and returned to the speech. The families deserved her best, and they would have it. Some battles were fought with weapons, others with words and unwavering dignity. Today, she would fight with both. Dawn broke over the memorial grounds like a whispered prayer. General Regina Matthews stood behind the stage curtain, her fingers tracing the worn edge of her speech notes. The morning air bit cold against her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the gathering crowd, hundreds of faces painted with the kind of grief that never truly fades. Through a gap in the curtain, she watched a gold star mother in the front row. The woman's weathered hands cradled a silver frame, her thumbs brushing across the glass as if trying to touch her child's smile one more time. Regina's throat tightened. This was why she'd flown here. This was what mattered. Folded flags dotted the audience like stars, held close by families who understood the true weight of service. Their quiet conversations carried on the wind, names spoken like benedictions, memories shared in hushed tones that honored more than mourned. 2 minutes, General, a young volunteer whispered. Regina nodded, squaring her shoulders. Her uniform felt especially heavy today, not from medals or brass, but from responsibility. She'd polished every button until it gleamed, knowing each reflection honored someone's sacrifice. When they called her name, she moved to the podium with measured steps. The microphone picked up her steady breathing as she surveyed the crowd. No scripted pleasantries would do. Not here. Not today. Love, she began, her voice clear and strong, shows itself in how we carry what we've lost. For 30 minutes, she spoke about dignity. Not as an abstract concept, but as the backbone of service. She talked about the quiet courage it takes to keep showing up, to empty chairs at holiday tables, to graduation ceremonies missing proud smiles, to everyday moments that echo with absence. Though she never mentioned the flight or the viral video, her words carried extra weight. The audience knew she'd just faced her own small battle for dignity, and won it with grace. When she spoke about standing tall through disrespect, about choosing integrity over anger, heads nodded in understanding. Our fallen gave everything, she concluded, not for glory or recognition, but because they believed in something bigger than themselves. The best way to honor them is to live by that same standard, to make every action worthy of their sacrifice. The standing ovation started slowly, a ripple of movement that grew into a wave. Through tear-blurred vision, Regina saw the Gold Star mother rise first, still clutching her photo frame. Others followed until the whole gathering stood as one, their applause saying what words couldn't. The memorial organizer, Mrs. Peterson, wrapped Regina in a fierce hug afterward. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "You gave them exactly what they needed, strength and hope together." Near the refreshment table, Regina noticed Thomas Chen, the airline's regional executive, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. He approached her with none of yesterday's corporate polish. "I get it now," he said quietly. "What happened on that plane, it wasn't just about a seat or a uniform, it was about seeing people's humanity first." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "We need to do better, not just say it, do it." Across town in his small apartment, flight attendant Mark Roberts sat at his kitchen table, watching a short clip of the speech someone had posted online. Her words about dignity hit him like physical blows, but it was her composure that undid him completely. The way she stood there, radiating strength without a hint of vindictiveness. His own actions looked smaller and meaner in comparison, but her example also showed him a path toward redemption. That evening, after most guests had gone, Regina sat at a round table with a small group of veterans and military widows. Someone told a gentle joke about mess hall food, and for the first time since boarding that flight, she felt her laugh bubble up naturally. The tension in her shoulders finally began to ease. Mrs. Peterson topped off Regina's coffee cup and squeezed her shoulder. "You know what gives me hope?" she said softly. "Watching you handle that airline situation with such grace. If you can make them listen, really listen, maybe things really can change." Regina smiled, watching the steam rise from her cup. The day's emotions settled around her like a familiar blanket. The grief, the pride, the unexpected moments of joy. She thought about Thomas Chen's transformed expression, about the flight attendants stumbling toward truth, about all the small ways people could choose to be better when given the chance. The conversation around her drifted to lighter topics: grandchildren's antics, upcoming veterans events, a new military family support program starting at the local church. Regina let the warmth of community wrap around her, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes started in quiet moments like these, when people chose to see each other's humanity first. The morning sun cast long shadows across the venue's entrance as Regina adjusted her uniform collar, watching reporters set up their equipment. Camera lenses glinted like curious eyes and microphones sprouted like steel flowers. She'd chosen one reporter, Sarah Chen from the local Veterans Affairs desk, who had a reputation for accuracy over sensationalism. "General Williams," Sarah began, her notepad ready. "Thank you for speaking with us. Could you describe what happened on that flight?" Regina stood straight, her posture military perfect. "The facts are simple. I was in my assigned first-class seat when a flight attendant challenged my right to be there and dismissed my uniform as fake. The captain corrected the situation, and now the airline has committed to reviewing their procedures. Some are calling for the flight attendant to be fired immediately." "Punishment without change helps no one," Regina replied evenly. "I'm asking for accountability and reform, not revenge. And I want to be clear, no one should be harassing this employee or the airline staff. That behavior dishonors the very principles of respect I'm fighting to uphold." Sarah nodded, writing quickly. "Your response has been called remarkably measured. The uniform I wear represents something larger than personal grievance. It stands for service, dignity, and doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Regina's voice carried quiet authority. "That's the standard I'm committed to maintaining." The interview lasted exactly 15 minutes. Regina thanked Sarah and declined all other media requests, walking steadily through the gauntlet of cameras to her rental car. Inside, she pulled out her phone and immediately regretted it. The online response had fractured into violent extremes. Some praised her as a saint of patience, building her into something impossibly perfect. Others, she scrolled through message after message attacking her very existence. They questioned her rank, her right to fly first class, her decision to speak up at all. "Go back to where you came from, playing the race card. Probably got promoted just because..." The words blurred as tears finally broke through her careful control. She sat in the quiet car, letting them fall, not from weakness but from the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying other people's hatred, while maintaining her own dignity. Her phone rang. It was Chaplin. Marcus, his timing perfect as always. "I saw the interview," he said gently. "You did well." "I'm tired, Marcus," she admitted, wiping her eyes. "So tired of having to be perfect just to be treated as human. May I read you something?" At her murmured yes, he continued. "Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." Regina closed her eyes, letting the familiar words wash over her. "But here's the part people forget," Marcus added. "Perseverance doesn't mean just taking it. Sometimes it means standing firm and demanding better, with grace but without compromise." She thought about the flight attendant, about the airline's rush to contain rather than correct. They want to bury this, Marcus. Quick-firing, private settlement. Everyone moves on until it happens again. So don't let them. Regina sat, straighter, decision crystallizing. "I want a mediated conversation with the flight attendant, not to make him comfortable, but to give him one chance to truly understand and change. And I want the airline to commit to real reforms, not just sacrifice one person to protect their system." "That's my general," Marcus said warmly, leading with wisdom instead of wounds. After they hung up, Regina opened her laptop and composed an email to Thomas Chen, the airline executive. Her fingers moved steadily across the keys. "Mr. Chen, I propose the following conditions for resolving this situation. 1. A mediated conversation with the flight attendant involved, focused on understanding and prevention, not punishment alone. 2. No non-disclosure agreements. Truth doesn't heal behind closed doors. 3. A public commitment to specific reforms, including mandatory bias training with measurable outcomes, clear procedures for passenger verification, a transparent complaint process with accountability. I await your response. Respectfully, Brigadier General Regina Williams." She read it twice, each word carefully chosen. Then, without hesitation, she clicked send. The soft whoosh of the email departing sounded like a breath held too long finally released. Regina sat back in her car seat, feeling the weight of her choices settle around her shoulders like a familiar rucksack. She wasn't choosing the easy path. Twitter wanted blood and corporate wanted silence. Instead, she was choosing the harder road of actual change. Her phone buzzed with another hate message. This time she deleted it without reading. Let them rage, she thought. Dignity wasn't about winning popularity contests. It was about standing firm on the ground of truth and giving others the chance to find their footing there too. She started the car knowing the next few days would test her resolve, but as she pulled away from the venue, her hands were steady on the wheel. The path forward was clear, even if it wasn't easy. Real change rarely was. The general's phone buzzed with an urgent news alert. She tapped the screen and her heart sank as she read the airline's hastily released statement. Effective immediately. The flight attendant involved in yesterday's incident has been terminated. We have zero tolerance for discrimination. That was it. No mention of policy changes, no commitment to training, just one person thrown under the bus to make the story go away. She set the phone down and walked to the hotel window, watching the sun set behind city buildings. The knot in her stomach tightened. After 30 years of service, she knew the difference between real change and a PR band-aid. Her phone buzzed again. This time, messages flooded in from friends and colleagues sharing screenshots. The flight attendant had posted on social media. "I was just doing my job, checking seats like we're trained to do. Anyone can buy a uniform online these days. The airline threw me under the bus to look good. What happened to innocent until proven guilty?" The general closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Not just because they were defensive, but because they showed he still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Comments poured in beneath his post. Some defended him, others attacked. Her name started trending again, with strangers debating her character, her service, her right to exist in first class. The whole circus was starting over. "Lord, give me wisdom," she whispered, reaching for her phone again. This time she dialed the airline executive's direct number. He answered on the first ring. "General, I was just about to call Kai." "Were you?" Her voice remained steady, but sharp as a razor. "Because I just read your statement, and I have concerns. We took swift action." "You found a scapegoat," she corrected him. "That's not the same as taking responsibility." Silence filled the line. "Listen carefully," she continued. Firing one person doesn't fix a broken system. It doesn't protect the next passenger who gets profiled. It doesn't train your staff to verify before they judge. We understand your frustration. This isn't about frustration. It's about standards. She thought of all the young service members watching this unfold. Right now, veteran organizations are asking me how the airline plans to prevent this from happening again. What should I tell them? The executive cleared his throat. We could discuss additional measures. I'll be direct, she cut in. Either we talk about real reform, bias training, verification protocols, passenger rights policies, or I take my concerns to the VA, to veterans groups, and to the transportation regulators. Your choice. More silence. You have my number, she finished. I expect a call by noon tomorrow with a real plan. After hanging up, she stood and walked to the closet where her uniform hung. Her fingers traced the general's stars, remembering how hard she'd worked for them. How many times she'd been tested, how many times she'd chosen dignity over bitterness. Carefully, she removed the uniform and began her nightly ritual of inspection and folding, each crease precise, each medal aligned. The familiar routine usually calmed her, but tonight her hands trembled slightly. Lord, she whispered, smoothing the jacket, help me stay focused on what matters. This isn't about revenge. It's about making things right. She placed the folded uniform in her suitcase, noting how the brass buttons caught the lamplight. 30 years of service had taught her that real change required both strength and strategy. Tomorrow would test both. The night air felt heavy with tension as sirens wailed somewhere in the city below. Her phone kept lighting up with notifications, but she left it face down on the desk. The next steps needed to come from a place of clarity, not reaction. She sat in the room's armchair, closed her eyes, and focused on her breathing, a technique that had served her well through countless storms. The path ahead was clear, even if it wouldn't be easy. Hold the line on real reform, resist the urge to strike back, and remember that true accountability looks forward, not just back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the VA hospital's entrance as General Regina Matthews walked beside Chaplain Sarah Brown. The familiar antiseptic smell mixed with coffee from the nurses' station brought back memories of her own father's stays here years ago. Some of our Vietnam vets have been asking about you, Sarah said softly. They saw the video. Regina nodded, squaring her shoulders as they entered the long-term care wing. An older veteran in a wheelchair spotted her uniform and raised his hand in a crisp salute. She returned it with equal precision. General, ma'am, he said, grinning through his grey beard. Heard you gave some youngster on a plane a proper education. Just maintaining standards, sir, she replied, noting the purple heart pin on his lapel. Down the hall they visited with veterans from different eras. A young Marine learning to walk with a prosthetic leg. An Air Force navigator battling cancer. Each one shared stories between jokes, their resilience shining through pain. In the physical therapy room, Regina watched a 20-something Army sergeant struggling with parallel bars, determination etched on his face. Ma'am, he grunted between steps. Saw what happened on that flight. Reminded me why. We keep pushing. Her throat tightened. These were her people. Not because of rank, but because of sacrifice. Each one had earned their place, their respect, their dignity. In the cafeteria later, Regina stirred her coffee while Sarah picked at a sandwich. The morning's visits crystallized something in her mind. This can't just be about one incident, Regina said, pulling out her notebook. Or one airline, or one uniform. Sarah nodded. What are you thinking? Regina began writing quickly. A dignity protocol. Mandatory training for all crew on military ID verification. Clear procedures before challenging any passenger's seat assignment. Partnership with veteran organizations for sensitivity education. She kept going, sketching out details. Regular audits of complaint handling. Support programs for veterans traveling with disabilities or PTSD. Real consequences for discrimination, but also paths for learning and growth. The airline might resist such big changes, Sarah cautioned. Then we'll take it to veteran advocacy groups, to Congress if needed. Regina's pen moved steadily across the page. This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the next soldier, sailor, or Marine doesn't face the same doubt. Her phone buzzed. An email from the airline executive, Marcus Chen. He agreed to review her proposal, but included a warning. Legal advises a confidential settlement may be the quickest resolution. Regina typed back one line. Dignity isn't negotiable. Across town, Jim Stevens, the flight attendant, stared at the mediation invitation on his kitchen counter. His uncle Robert, a retired army sergeant, stood beside him. "I can't face her," Jim muttered. "Everyone already thinks I'm the villain." "Then prove them wrong," Robert said firmly. "You've spent a week feeling sorry for yourself. Now you have a choice. Hide behind excuses or become the man you claim you are." Jim's hands shook slightly as he picked up the invitation. His uncle's words cut through his defensive anger, leaving only truth. He had been wrong, and running would make it worse. Back in her hotel room that evening, Regina stood before the mirror. She pinned her general's stars to her uniform jacket with practiced precision. Each star represented years of service, of proving herself, of earning her place. The jacket still bore the creases from that flight, like a reminder pressed into fabric. But tomorrow wasn't about that pain anymore. It was about turning it into something bigger, a standard that would protect others long after the viral video faded. She smoothed the jacket one final time, ready to face both the airline leadership and the man who had doubted her. The stars caught the light, not as weapons, but as anchors of truth. "Guard us and guide us," she whispered, her father's old prayer coming naturally to her lips. Tomorrow would test her commitment to justice with mercy. But tonight, watching those veterans push through their own battles had reminded her why this mattered. Dignity wasn't just about seats or stars. It was about seeing the worth in every person who served, who sacrificed, who showed up despite the scars. The Dignity Protocol draft sat on her desk, each page filled with specific reforms and measurable actions. It wasn't just a response to humiliation anymore. It was a blueprint for change, written in the language of service and honor that every veteran would recognize. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished hallway of the mediation center as General Regina Thompson walked toward the conference room, her steps measured and purposeful. Her chaplain friend, Reverend Marcus, matched her stride, his quiet presence steadying her like an anchor. Through the glass panel, she spotted Jerry Walker, the flight attendant, sitting alone on a bench. His shoulders curved inward, hands tightly clasped between his knees. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, which lifted to meet hers as she approached. For the first time since that day on the plane, he truly saw her. Jerry scrambled to his feet, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "General Thompson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The respectful tone felt foreign after his previous contempt, but she noticed something different in his face now. Recognition, maybe even understanding. Inside the conference room, morning light streamed through tall windows onto a long mahogany table. 3 airline representatives sat on one side, the executive she'd met before, flanked by 2 sharp-suited lawyers. Their leather portfolios lay open, documents already arranged in neat stacks. "General Thompson, thank you for joining us today." The executive, Mr. Harrison, gestured to an empty chair. "We're eager to resolve this situation." Regina settled into her seat, Reverend Marcus taking the chair beside her. The room smelled of coffee and fresh paper, with an undercurrent of tension thick enough to touch. Jerry sat across from her, separated by the airline team. His eyes kept darting between her and the lawyers, like a man caught between 2 worlds. "Before we begin," one of the lawyers spoke, sliding a thick document across the table, "we've prepared a standard agreement that addresses everyone's interests." Regina didn't reach for the papers. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and waited. "It's a generous package," Mr. Harrison added quickly. "Full compensation for any inconvenience, plus additional considerations we think you'll find more than fair." The second lawyer tapped a manicured nail on specific paragraphs. "The non-disclosure agreement is standard procedure. It ensures private matters stay private, allowing everyone to move forward." "Private matters," Regina repeated, her voice calm but firm. "Is that what we're calling public discrimination now?" Jerry flinched at her words, his face flushing red. "General," Mr. Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "We understand your concerns. This agreement allows us to make things right while avoiding any unnecessary complications." Regina opened her folder and pulled out her own document. "I've outlined the necessary changes here. mandatory verification protocols before challenging any passenger's seat assignment, bias training that goes beyond checkboxes, a clear procedure for passenger rights and dignity that every crew member must follow. The lawyers exchanged glances. "Those kinds of public commitments create significant liability risks," the first one said. "The settlement offer is a much cleaner solution." Jerry shifted in his seat, opening his mouth to speak. The second lawyer shot him a sharp look, and he deflated, closing his lips around unspoken words. Regina watched this exchange with growing clarity. "Mr. Walker," she said directly to Jerry, "did you want to say something?" Before he could answer, Mr. Harrison interrupted. "Mr. Walker's employment status is a separate matter. Today we're focused on reaching an agreement with you, General." "No," Regina said quietly. "We're focused on making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, and that includes addressing why it happened in the first place." She stood, gathering her materials with deliberate care. "I won't sign away someone else's dignity for a comfortable silence. When you're ready to discuss real change, you know where to find me." Reverend Marcus rose beside her, a steady presence at her shoulder. "General Thompson," Mr. Harrison called after her, "please understand, rejecting this resolution will only complicate matters." She paused at the door, turning back one last time. "It was already complicated. I'm just refusing to pretend it's simple." The walk back to her hotel felt longer than usual. By evening, her phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts and messages reacting to the latest headline: "General rejects airline's resolution attempt, controversy continues." In her room, Regina stood at the window, watching city lights flicker on in the growing darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, still in her uniform, still standing straight, but her eyes showed the weight of the day. She touched the small Bible verse card in her pocket, its edges worn smooth from years of similar moments. The familiar words didn't make the path easier, but they reminded her why she chose it. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she removed her shoes, feeling bone-tired. Doing the right thing had always cost something, but as headlines twisted her choice into controversy and emails piled up with opinions from strangers, she wondered if the price this time might be more than she'd bargained for. A text message lit up her phone from the chaplain. "Still proud of you, still standing with you." Regina closed her eyes, letting out a long breath. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. For now, she just needed to remember why she started this fight in the first place. Not for herself, but for everyone who would come after her, hoping to find dignity in their seats. The morning sun filtered through stained glass windows as General Regina Matthews slipped into the back pew of First Methodist Church. Without her uniform jacket, she felt oddly exposed. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish wrapped around her like a childhood blanket. "Be still and know," she whispered, touching the worn Bible verse card in her pocket. Her shoulders, tense from days of controversy, finally lowered as the organ music began. Chaplain Sarah Wilson, her friend of 20 years, found her there and sat quietly beside her. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The congregation stood to sing Amazing Grace, and Regina let the harmony wash over her, remembering all the Sunday mornings that had steadied her through difficult seasons. After the service, Sarah squeezed her hand. "Truth isn't always comfortable, Regina, but it's always right." "I'm tired," Regina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I should have taken their settlement." "That's not you," Sarah said firmly, "and that's not what God put you there to do." Regina nodded, gathering strength from the simple wisdom. As they walked to the parking lot, Sarah reminded her, David didn't face Goliath alone. He had an army behind him. The afternoon flight home was mercifully uneventful. Regina kept her phone off, choosing instead to review her notes from the memorial service. The faces of Gold Star families floated in her memory, their dignity in loss, their quiet strength. They deserved better than performative respect. At home, she finally checked her messages. Among the chaos of social media opinions and news requests, several stood out. Colonel James Martinez, her former commander. "We've got your 6, General." Lieutenant Garcia from Veterans Affairs. "Let us help you make this count." Sandra Wheeler from the military. Family Alliance. "This isn't just about one flight anymore." Regina made 3 calls that evening. The veteran leaders listened carefully, offered resources, and helped her shape a strategy that felt both ambitious and achievable. "The airline wants this to disappear," Colonel Martinez said, "but we can help you make it matter." "Bring us the draft protocol," Lieutenant Garcia added. "We'll put some teeth in it." Sandra Wheeler's suggestion sparked hope. What if we frame this as a partnership? Not just fixing what went wrong, but building something right. Regina's dining room table became a command center. She spread out paper, started writing, and let years of military planning guide her hand. The Dignity Protocol took shape. Clear verification steps before challenging any passenger, mandatory cultural awareness training, and a formal complaint process with oversight from veteran organizations. For the flight attendant, whose name she now knew was Michael Peterson, she outlined a different path. Not just termination, but education. Not just shame, but service. Required learning about military culture, volunteering with veteran groups, and a chance to help train others once he showed real change. Her uniform cap sat at the corner of the table, its polished brim catching the lamplight. Regina touched it gently, remembering every step that led to wearing it, every doubt she'd faced, every barrier she'd crossed. She drafted an email to the airline executive. "I will not sign away the truth, but I will help you build something better. Here are my terms." Her finger hovered over the send button. The choice felt heavy, like command decisions always did, but she knew it was right. Sarah's morning words echoed. "Truth isn't always comfortable." Regina pressed send, then stood and walked to her window. The street was quiet, ordinary, but she felt the weight of this moment. Sometimes dignity had to be defended not with anger, but with steady resolve. She returned to the table and opened her notebook. One page for next steps, one page for potential allies, one page for the changes that had to happen. The uniform cap stayed where it was, a silent witness to promises that needed keeping. Her phone buzzed, with messages of support from other veterans, but she let them wait. Right now she needed to build this foundation carefully. Truth first, then accountability, then change. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight as she worked, but Regina barely noticed. This was familiar territory, planning an operation, securing resources, identifying objectives. The battlefield was different, but the principles remained the same. Clear mission, strong allies, unwavering standards. She wrote at the top of her protocol draft, "Dignity is not negotiable, it is verified, protected, and taught." The rest of the document flowed from there, each point building on military precision and human respect. By the time she finished the first page, she knew this was more than just a response to one incident. It was a blueprint for lasting change. The morning sun streamed through tall windows of the airline's headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished conference table. General Mitchell squared her shoulders, drawing strength from the crisp feel of her uniform and the steady presence of Colonel James Parker, the veterans advocate, beside her. This wasn't like last week's meeting. Gone were the PR scripts and carefully rehearsed sympathy. Instead, she found herself facing a semicircle of airline executives whose stiff postures betrayed genuine discomfort. The CEO, Marcus Henderson, cleared his throat. "General Mitchell, before we begin, I want to acknowledge something clearly. What happened on that flight was discrimination, pure and simple. Our initial response was inadequate and focused more on damage control than addressing the real issue." She nodded once, maintaining eye contact but letting the silence stretch. Sometimes the hardest truth needed room to breathe. "We're here to do better," Henderson continued, gesturing to the thick folder in front of him. "Not just with words, but with concrete actions." The door opened quietly, and Thomas Barrett, the flight attendant, entered. He looked different now, humbled, but also somehow more present. His uniform was gone, replaced by a dark suit that seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness, "I'd like to speak if you'll permit it." The general gestured for him to continue. Barrett stood, leaving his prepared notes on the table. "What I did was wrong," he began, meeting her gaze directly. "I looked at you and made assumptions about your uniform, your rank, your right to be in that seat. I didn't verify, I didn't listen. I let my prejudices override my training and basic human respect." His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained clear. "I'm not here to blame protocol or pressure or anything else. The fault was mine. I've spent the past week in training with veteran groups, learning about service and sacrifice. I've listened to stories that make me ashamed of how I acted. Barrett straightened his shoulders. I accept full responsibility and any consequences. I'm committed to completing extensive bias training, performing service hours with veteran organizations, and serving a probation period focused on passenger respect. If allowed to return to work, I want to be part of making sure this never happens to anyone else. The room fell quiet. General Mitchell studied him for a long moment, measuring the weight of his words against the memory of that day on the plane. When she spoke, her voice carried both strength and grace. "Mr. Barrett, I accept your apology as a beginning," she said. "Trust isn't restored with words alone. It requires sustained action and genuine change. I'll be watching to see if your commitments translate into consistent behavior." Colonel Parker opened his briefcase, removing several documents. "Let's discuss the specific reforms," he said, sliding copies across the table. The next hour passed in focused discussion. The airline's legal team reviewed each point of the reform package, a new verified seat protocol, requiring multiple checks before any passenger could be challenged, comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff, and a clear escalation pathway for passenger rights concerns. Additionally, Henderson added, "We're establishing a partnership fund for military family travel support and a scholarship program for service members pursuing aviation careers." The general leaned forward. "And transparency? How will progress be measured and reported?" "Quarterly public updates," Henderson replied. "No NDAs, no hidden metrics. We'll establish an oversight committee that includes veteran representatives." They moved through the signatures methodically, each page a brick in the foundation of real change. When the last document was signed, General Mitchell stood. The press waited outside, but this moment belonged to the people in this room first. "Dignity," she said, looking at each, face in turn, "is not a favor we grant or withhold. It's the standard we must all maintain." She paused, then added more softly, "Today you've chosen to meet that standard. Now we all have to live up to it." Minutes later, facing the gathered media, she repeated those words with the airline's leadership standing behind her. Not in practiced formation, but with genuine solidarity. The cameras flashed, but what mattered most was the weight of the signed reforms in her briefcase and the knowledge that her humiliation would become a catalyst for lasting change. For the first time since that flight, she felt truly steady. This wasn't about revenge or even personal vindication. It was about setting a standard that would protect others long after the headlines faded. Colonel Parker squeezed her elbow gently as they walked away from the microphones. "Well done, General." She thought of all the service members who would board planes in the years to come, of the passengers who would never know why their dignity was now better protected. "We just did our duty, Colonel," she replied. "Same as always." The autumn sunlight streamed through the airport windows as General Marion Davis adjusted her silk blouse, a change from her usual uniform. Her fingers brushed against the worn Bible verse card in her pocket, just as they had a year ago. The familiar words brought comfort. "Be strong and courageous." She watched travelers hurry past the new signs mounted near the gates. Bold letters spelled out "Passenger Rights and Dignity Protocol," with clear instructions for both crew and customers. At her gate, the boarding announcement came through with measured respect. "As a reminder to our crew, please verify all seating assignments according to standard procedure." Marion felt her shoulders relax slightly. Small changes, but meaningful ones. As she waited in the boarding line, she overheard two flight attendants discussing their recent training. "The verification steps are actually faster," one said, "and there's less confusion overall. The jet bridge felt different this time. No need for silent prayers or squared shoulders. Just another Tuesday morning flight." Inside the cabin, a young flight attendant with bright eyes greeted her with genuine warmth. "Good morning, ma'am. May I help you find your seat?" Before Marion could respond, she noticed a young black woman in an Air Force uniform striding confidently toward first class. No one stopped her. No one questioned her right to be there. The officer simply stored her carry-on and sat down, exchanging pleasant small talk with her seatmate. Marion settled into her own seat a few rows back, surprised by the thickness in her throat. She hadn't expected such a simple moment to move her so deeply. Midway through the flight, she noticed a familiar face in the aisle. James Cooper, the former flight attendant, now wearing a navy blazer with a training department badge. He moved through the cabin quietly, clipboard in hand, observing the crew's interactions with passengers. She studied him discreetly. His demeanor had changed, the defensive edge gone, replaced by focused professionalism. He checked off items on his observation sheet, occasionally making notes about service standards and verification procedures. When he passed her row, their eyes met briefly. He gave a small, respectful nod, not seeking praise or forgiveness, just acknowledging their shared history with dignity. She returned the gesture, recognizing the work he'd put in to earn his second chance. Later, as passengers prepared to deplane, Cooper approached her seat. He maintained a careful distance, his voice low and steady. "General Davis," he said, "I wanted to thank you, not for being kind, for being firm, for demanding better instead of letting anger win." He paused. "The veterans I work with in our training program, they're teaching me something new every day." Marion nodded, seeing the genuine change in him. "That's what accountability looks like," she said simply. "Keep doing the work." That evening at the memorial dinner, Marion sat among Gold Star families, veterans and service members. The conversation flowed easily, stories of sacrifice, memories of loved ones, quiet moments of shared understanding. Between courses, an envelope appeared beside her plate. Inside was a note written in careful script. "General Davis, my son gave his life believing in a better America. Last year, when you stood your ground. With such grace, my daughter watched and learned. She's 15 now, and because of you, she believes the world can change, not through force, but through unwavering dignity. Thank you for showing her what courage really means. With gratitude, Sarah Mitchell, Gold Star Mom." Marion touched the corner of the paper, feeling tears well up. She looked across the room at the faces of young service members, at Sarah Mitchell's teenage daughter sitting proudly beside her mother, at the future they were all still fighting for. Not with weapons now, but with steady hearts and relentless hope. The worn verse card pressed against her hip, its message as true now as it had been a year ago. But tonight, courage tasted like victory. Not the loud kind that comes with fanfare, but the quiet triumph of changed minds and opened doors. She carefully folded the note, tucking it away with the verse card. Another reminder that dignity, when defended without hatred, multiplies in ways you can't predict. Sometimes the biggest victories come in the smallest moments. A young officer walking unchallenged to her seat, a reformed man doing the quiet work of change, a teenager believing in possibility.